Today on the Auto Buyer's Guide podcast, we have a ton of things to talk about. Robo-taxis, self-driving, features in new cars that we absolutely hate and should just be destroyed, removed from existence, period. We're going to be talking about the new charge adapters that are available from a variety of different manufacturers. And assuming I can talk about it, there's some big news from Hyundai. But if you don't hear that news in this episode, then whoopsie, you're just going to have to stay tuned for another episode because I haven't been given an embargo date. And maybe it is up by the time you hear this episode. Maybe it's not.
If you're looking for a new or used car to buy, maybe a truck or SUV or all-electric ride, we're the guys to help you decide on the Auto Buyer's Guide.
So, Alex, we are just a couple days away from Tesla allegedly unveiling the robo-taxi. And so that means that the end of all cars are coming in the next week or so. What do you think?
I'm curious to see what they do with the robotaxi. How Waymo is it? Will they honk at people or honk at themselves in a parking lot? Will they get stuck? Are they going to trap any vice presidential motorcades as they attempt to enter or exit cities?
I mean, these are really important questions. One of my biggest questions is what is it actually going to look like? Because every rendering in the world can be as close or as far as it wants, but we're not that far away. Is how car-like is this going to look, or is it going to be a cyber taxi?
My guess, this is just my guess, I'm guessing it's just going to be a Model Y or a Model 3.
With
Maybe
some
some
of the
extra
components taken out.
Yeah, with some extra jazz, extra cameras and sensors. I really hope it has more cameras and more sensors. Let's put it that way. Let's hope that it drives better than full self-driving. And this does kind of make me ask, though, does this mean that full self-driving is going to get better? Because if we have a robotaxi, can we get some robotaxi jazz onto a non-robotaxi to make it drive better?
It's a good question. I know that there have been some spy photos of allegedly Model 3s with some different components, but it's all been heavily camouflaged. And people were wondering, is that going to be the cheaper version? And it's possible that it's actually camouflaged because it's hiding some of those cameras. I would assume, though, they put Model Ys out there. That's just kind of what the consumer wants is more space.
Yeah.
But I guess we'll wait and see. As far as the extra components, the bigger question I have is that going to, if it has extra hardware, how is it going to interact with the other vehicles that already have the current hardware and the promise of a fully self-driving vehicle? Because it was not that many years ago when full self-driving or autopilot came out that it said, hey, this car you are buying will one day be able to drive itself and you'll be able to send it to a robo-taxi fleet.
Yeah.
But if there is a robo-taxi, aren't those two things kind of in conflict?
I'm just going to go ahead and say if you bought your Model 3, 5 years ago in the hopes of it one day being a robotaxi, then I'm sorry that you hoped that. It's probably not going to happen. That's my guess. I will say...
But what about me? I bought mine last year.
I will say if it doesn't have radar sensors, lots of them, and lots of LiDAR sensors, then I am not interested in riding in this thing if nobody's behind the wheel. Because even the Waymos can sometimes go a little bit wrong, and pretty much every other expert in this industry, and I would say at this point there are experts for sure in the robotaxi field outside of Tesla, because Tesla doesn't have one that functions.
Right.
Hyundai, General Motors, Google, etc. These other companies that are out there doing robotaxis, they have all said all these extra sensors are absolutely essential. So if we have, a Tesla with a tiny bit of radar, no LiDAR, and some cameras, I don't think I'm going to ride in that unless there's a human.
Yeah, which then obviously defeats the purpose of it being a robo-taxi. And then it just becomes a Model 3 or a Model Y that has some extra bits that, I guess, are you contracted with Tesla if you're one of those drivers? Or are you, I don't know, are you an employee? Are you a contractor? Are you a taxi driver? These are all big questions, but we don't have to wait too much longer. Apparently October 10th is the day. I was waiting for our invitation in the mail and I keep checking, but I don't think it's coming.
I'm going to go ahead and guess no. I'm going to guess that that nobody is invited except for the ultimate in Tesla fanboys. I will say Tesla's done a good job of hyping things, and this is probably one of those moves. It's going to be great for their stock value. So, full
Mm.
disclosure, Travis owns some Tesla stock. So let's hope your stock does well there. I own no Tesla stock, and I should have, because I just missed the boat on that puppy. That's unfortunate.
Hmm.
I think that Tesla has been seeing some valuation drops, though, because some of the shine has worn off of the penny, in a way, to mix my
Hmm.
metaphors around. And we're starting to see the fact that Tesla is a car company that has some tech here and there. But I don't know if I would go with the description of Tesla as a tech company, since their core business is moving cars. They're certainly
Hmm.
more tech focused company than most of the other car companies out there. But when it comes to these semi-autonomous and autonomous driving systems, I'd argue that so far Tesla has not been in the lead. They've been in the lead when it comes to ignoring or aggressively interpreting safety
Hmm.
regulations around the world. They've been aggressive at allowing the customer to decide what is safe, rather than
Hmm.
lawyers and conservative bodies, et cetera. They take that as you may.
Hmm.
But when it comes to actual self-driving tech, Super Cruise is significantly smoother, in my experience. It doesn't do the things that full self-driving will do, but I think that's because GM's just worried about liability. Not that it couldn't. I think they just don't want it to.
Yeah, I mean, it really has been a risk game, and there was a time I would have said Tesla is definitely ahead, and it's because all of the cars they're putting on the road were capable of this sort of driver assist, and the promise of it being full self driving was always going to be a stretch. And like you said, we've got a number of manufacturers who now have hands off the wheel driving, which is
Hmm.
far and above what Tesla is able to do at this time. And they're using a lot more hardware, where Tesla's
Yeah.
really counting on that vision. And just a sneak peek to the features we have on vehicles today that I don't appreciate: my Tesla auto sensing wipers, because it's all vision based and it never works right.
Which is kind of funny, because it's pretty easy to see rain on your windshield as a human, but not necessarily as a camera, oddly enough, which is one of those funny things there.
Turns out.
Um, and even with all the extra sensors on board of the vehicles, to be honest, I don't know if there's a sensor suite that would prevent that woman that got run over by the Cruise in San Francisco, where things went a little bit awry. The car hit her, then it couldn't see her, and then it sort of dragged her underneath the Cruise for a bit.
Hmm.
I don't know if any of the sensors that we see now would have prevented that. So keep that in mind, guys.
No,
If you're going, sensors aren't the answer. Sensors might not have fixed that.
right. There was no undercar object detection, right?
Yeah.
I think the other question, and it's a much bigger scale that we don't need to dive into, but at what point do we consider these systems safe enough? Because if they are
Mhm.
safer than the average human driver, then shouldn't that be safe enough? Humans are not particularly known for being the most incredible drivers in the world. Obviously, up to this point, all vehicle accidents have been caused by humans. So we get to a point where, does it have to have zero incidents, or is it just one of those things that's kind of bound to happen?
Hey, sometimes they're caused by an alligator in the road. Just ask drivers in Florida. That's it. It's not their fault. It was the gator.
Couldn't help it.
Um, yeah, I'm curious. I think some of that's going to come down to, personally, I think it's going to come down to liability, and whose fault is it when your self-driving Tesla runs over Granny? Do you get to sue Tesla? Do you sue the owner of the car? All of the
Hmm.
above. We are a litigious people here in America, so
Hmm.
watch out for those lawsuits. That's probably going to be the direction. And that takes us sort of to subject number 2 that I wanted to talk about, which was the question of one pedal driving. And this is kind of an
Hmm.
interesting twist. I was recently talking to a few people that advocates of and against one pedal driving. I know you obviously use one pedal driving a lot because you have a Tesla,
Hmm.
so it's the only way
Hmm.
to recover maximum energy. And Tesla has, of course, defaulted everybody to the more aggressive one pedal mode.
Right.
We have to back this up by saying that in a Tesla, when you put your foot on the brake pedal, you don't get any extra regeneration into the battery. So
Yep.
the only way to recoup energy in the battery of your Tesla is to just use the one pedal drive mode. Anytime you're touching the brake pedal, You're leaving electrons on the table.
Regular brakes. Yep.
Yep. Not so for the average EV that's outside of the Tesla window, although there are exceptions. Rivian, very similar actually to the Tesla
Mm-hmm.
model. But Ford, GM, Volvo, Polestar, etc., they all use blended braking, Porsche, BMW, Mercedes, etc. So with these systems, you take your foot off the accelerator pedal. By default, there's a little bit of regeneration, mimicking
Mm-hmm.
more of an ICE vehicle feel. And then you put your foot on the brake pedal and you get more regeneration until that's not enough. And then the system's going to blend in the friction brakes, which is why it's called blended braking. Now,
Yep.
Tesla recently added a little option in their software for quote unquote blended braking. It's not the same kind of blended braking. In
Right.
this instance, they're going to be trying to blend in some friction brakes with the regen to give you a more consistent feel at higher states of charge and things like that. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not the same action that we're talking about here. Now, there's lots and lots of talk about this, but the reason I brought this up is that it's very divisive. There are certainly Tesla-defined features that Tesla created that have moved on to the rest of the industry because it's novel and because it's tech-forward seeming, and just honestly because it's Tesla and there's that brand and
Mm-hmm.
people want a piece of that. So
The
before we
Tesla
get back
effect.
to this, yeah, Tesla effect. So before we get back to this one pedal thing, what else do you see as a Tesla effect, design or operation wise, out there?
Well, I think Tesla has drastically moved forward the size of screens in vehicles. Obviously, Tesla has been on these smaller cars, the Y and the 3, a single screen, but it was very novel for the Model
Mm-hmm.
S and the Model X to bring in that enormous screen, which I think
Yeah,
is probably about the size of what we see in like the F-150 Lightning and the Mach-E.
I think it's
But
actually still
that's
bigger than Lightning screen, actually.
it could be right, but there is no integrated dial into it, so I guess Ford
Mm-hmm.
has them there. It's one of those things that's definitely been a Tesla forward piece. But interestingly, Tesla hasn't adopted a heads-up display, which
Mm-hmm.
I've been a bit surprised about, because if they want to go minimalist, that is a pretty good way to do it.
Yeah. And it is interesting. I mean, Tesla was so far ahead of the screen size desire there that they could not even find a manufacturer of LCDs to make an LCD appropriate for a car. And this is
Hmm.
where Tesla's risk taking again comes into play. So this has been a thing Tesla's done their entire career. If we talk about a company that has a career, mind you, that's weird, but
Hmm.
hey, whatever. So
Lifespan,
Model
whatever you
S,
want.
yeah, lifespan. They couldn't get a company to make a screen for the Model S that would meet automotive standards. So Elon, being Elon, said, well, let's just grab an industrial screen and we'll call it industrial grade. Well,
Hmm.
industrial grade is not as good as automotive grade, funny enough.
Hmm.
And temperatures are a big part of that, which is why all those early Model S's had screens that turned yellow and they started leaking adhesives and things like that and had to get replaced because they simply weren't designed for a car environment. But, eventually we did find screens that big, and now we
Hmm.
have massive, massive screens inside. I don't know about you, but the other thing that I see that Tesla did is the whole control the air vents via the on-screen thing.
Hmm. Yeah, that's definitely become more popular, and still pretty divisive amongst folks.
Yeah, divisive, and not everybody does it as well as Tesla does. Tesla hides the mechanism for moving the air around really well, deeply in the dashboard. Some of the other car companies, you wiggle your finger around the screen and you actually see the louvers moving like a 1980s car, and you're like, what was the point? I could have just grabbed that myself.
Right. It spoils the magic a little bit.
Hmm. And then, of course, there's the button minimalism, which ties in with this. That was
Hmm.
part of Tesla's desire, was to minimalize the buttons. Although that whole screen touchy air vent thing, that's got to be more expensive than just giving someone a knob, because you have to have
I would
the
think so.
mechanism to make that
Yeah.
work. But there's definitely been a button minimalist trend, largely run by Tesla, and other car companies have copied these sorts of things. I'd also say things like the funky flip-in aerodynamic handles, the Bluetooth phone
Hmm.
as key feature, etc. There's actually quite a bit to credit for in
The
this
arrow
game.
wheel.
Hmm. And
Hmm.
arrow wheels, I would argue they existed
It
before
goes
because we
farther
had,
back,
yeah, yeah.
but yeah.
Hey, but at least they didn't bring back the wheel skirts from the 1980s. So
You
you
know
have
what?
a
I I'd try it out.
Do a little bit of Cadillac Fleetwood with your Model
Yeah,
S back there. That could
yeah,
be, could be interesting. But this goes back to the one pedal thing. So the origin story of the one pedal driving on Tesla's front is that they didn't want to spend the money to design a blended braking system. There
right.
is some argument to be made that blended braking systems don't always have great feel, although Porsche would really object to that because the Taycan's brake pedal feel is truly fantastic. Full blended braking system there. So it clearly can be done, but it cannot be done inexpensively. And
Right.
in a Tesla, it's actually pretty easy to dial in, consistent regeneration. Take your foot off the accelerator pedal, bang, we're doing 100 kilowatts in the battery, some
Mhm.
particular staged in phase. And then brake pedal, you're on your own for the brake pedal. The interesting thing here, and the reason I bring this up is because it appears that China is poised to ban one pedal driving. They have already mandated that changes be made to the way that Tesla handles creep, etc., with
Okay.
the one pedal drive mode. But it looks like they're going to ban one pedal driving, period, in China, including all of the Chinese companies. Like no one pedal driving for anything in China. And
Hmm.
they're doing this on the basis of safety, they say.
I mean, you and I we have obviously gone back and forth on preferences and feels, and I really do lean towards one pedal driving, not just because I have a Tesla, but I've always appreciated sort of a different way to control the car. And to me, where most of my vehicles prior to plugins were manual transmissions, the one pedal drive feels like my car is always in second, maybe third gear, and I feel like I have a lot of control over how much or how little I'm speeding up or slowing down. Even though
Mm-hmm.
it's one less pedal, it actually feels closer to a three pedal setup. So I appreciate having that control with one foot, not dialing back and forth between the two. Taking it away entirely seems interesting. If anything, if it was kind of a safety concern, especially with all these electric cars coming out, these are all very heavily software based vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
If it was a safety concern, you could default them at order to no one pedal driving. And then, like every other option in the world, you can click, I want to turn this on, read the safety notice, click yes, and
Mm-hmm.
then you understand that's what you're doing. But I'm also really curious to see the data.
Yeah, China has been all of a sudden interested in safety regulations and increasing safety of vehicles. So, over the last decade or so, we've seen China's regulatory bodies go from a very hands off, you can have a very unsafe thing, to just generally interested in safety and harmonizing safety rules and regulations with the rest of the world. So, unpacking this, the origin story of the one pedal driving and the concern here mainly has to do with muscle memory. This is not something I'd actually
Hmm.
thought about until I had read some of these stories. Research is still hard to get. There's some research out of Greece, a little bit in Germany, but not a lot in the Western world about one pedal driving. So in China, it's not that they want to turn off the one pedal driving by default. They do not want it available at all. Like you cannot
Right.
have one pedal driving. And the origin story is if you are in regular traffic and you're daily driving and this is your only car and you're driving your Great Wall or your SAIC or your Geely or whatever, or your Zeekr
Hmm.
around, because it's not just Tesla. In fact, Tesla has a small market share now in China. It's actually the
At
majority
this
of these
point.
Chinese vendors really that
Yeah.
are the ire of the government. So before anybody says this is just China being anti-Tesla, nope, they have all the Chinese domestic manufacturers in their sites here.
Yep.
There's a rise in complaints about unintended acceleration in
Mm.
EVs. And that is something that we've seen in North America and Europe as well.
Yep.
The regulatory body and the research institutes in China are saying that their research points to one pedal driving being the origin of the unintended acceleration. Not that there's
Hmm.
anything mechanically wrong with the vehicle. They're saying there's
Right.
something wrong with the driver. And that
Right. The
here's what
programming up here.
up here in the brain. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this is what they're saying. So they're saying if you're just using one pedal all the time and 99.99, 100% of the time you're just using the one foot, you lose the
Hmm.
muscle memory to move your foot from one pedal over to the other. And so you may,
Mm.
in a panic situation, overshoot, undershoot, stick your
Right.
foot back on the accelerator pedal. It seems that inexperienced drivers, they may just actually stick their foot on the accelerator pedal instead of the brake pedal because they're just not, you know, their brain's not there because they've been
Right.
learning in this one pedal thing. The other thing that I found interesting is that early research also indicates that even if this is an experienced driver that spent most of their time in ICE vehicles, but they've become
Hmm.
used to one pedal driving, transitions between moderate deceleration, regular traffic, and then emergency situations, it takes
Right.
longer for them to actually initiate an emergency braking maneuver because they
Mm.
don't tend to hover their foot over the brake pedal. So when the car is slowing
Right.
down, they're so used to the one pedal that the foot is, on the right side. Then,
Right. It's a little
oopsie,
slower getting.
yeah, stuff goes down, so they put it on the other side. And
Hmm.
apparently, in behavioral science studies here, drivers that are not in a one pedal drive car or have it disabled and prefer that mode, they
Hmm.
tend to be in the habit of lifting off the accelerator pedal and hovering over the brake pedal, even if the liftoff regen is sufficient for their task. So they are actually closer to
Right.
the thing that's going to emergency stop. So I am personally intrigued to see what China does, because it could be that the rule may be enacted in the next few months and would actually
Hmm.
start January 1st, 2026.
I think a couple pieces there that are most interesting to me. The first is I wonder how many unintended acceleration incidents are really happening, because it's one of those things that we just haven't seen to this effect. Like, obviously, there have always been unintended accelerations, people punching the gas
Mm-hmm.
instead of the brake. But an electric car, it's a very different experience, right? We had, I worked at Tesla back in starting 2015, and a lot of these folks are coming into their first electric car, and they're coming from a nice vehicle, but not a performance car, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that electric vehicle, 0 to 30, is a performance car almost no matter which one you get. And so that's when you get the biggest oh no from jumping the curb and now you're in the storefront. So obviously that makes the news, but it's going to make the news a lot more than I think a unintended acceleration in a Toyota Sienna, right? Because it's not going to do the same thing. There's
Right.
more time to respond. So I'm curious about how many there are. But then my other thought extends the opposite direction back towards manuals. Because if we're looking at it as a safety concern, and there is relevant data that says that automatic standard ICE automatic drivers are going to be able to quicker respond on the brake than a electric vehicle that uses one pedal driving. Is it also slower? I would imagine it is technically slower for most people who are driving manuals. And so I'm just curious, would that extend that
It
other direction?
doesn't Yeah, it doesn't seem to be, because in an emergency situation, people with manuals tend to do the same cover the brake pedal with the right foot, and the
Hmm.
clutch does whatever the clutch
You go
does.
to
So
neutral. Yeah.
it's actually pretty common, even for experienced drivers in a panic situation, to just stall the engine,
Hmm.
because they don't, or the instinct is to
First thought is
either
brake,
both feet
not
down,
clutch into
or
neutral.
right. And so they'll
Yeah.
either both feet in and brake and clutch at the same time, or they just
Mhm.
tend to go for the brake and stall the engine. But the
Right.
answer here for is it different, and this is early data, mind you. So in
Yeah. Yeah.
2019, NHTSA issued a petition for further investigation. Sorry, a petition was issued for further investigation from NHTSA, sorry.
Okay.
And the original filing here was that Teslas had 6,000% higher unintended acceleration incidents versus similar vehicles, quote unquote. Now,
Hmm.
I'd say we have to unpack that, because that is tricky. There was nothing similar in 2019 really to any of those three vehicles. Nothing was that
Yeah.
fast or, designed that way. Tesla was still very much the elephant in the room with electrification.
Right. With such
But
a wide variety of cars being traded in for those vehicles.
yeah,
Yeah.
but it is interesting that apparently now in China, Chinese made Teslas and all Chinese made EVs were recalled to include new features that allowed switching off regenerative braking, for instance, things
Hmm.
like that. So they're already in that mode, and they're trying to change this here. Um, there were a bunch of other dramas in this little laundry list here of the history. But
Right.
interestingly, it has reached a fever pitch in China, and this is where some caution must be added here, because some of this may be related to, statistically, 6,000% sounds huge, but if we're talking like 600 unintended acceleration events in a calendar year versus 50 somewhere else, I mean, that's a big change, but it's not a lot of them necessarily.
Right.
So it depends on that. But it has apparently become a thing to install, to get this, dash cams in China have been a big thing for a while, but they will now put
Yeah.
dash cams in the footwells of their car because they want to be able to prove that the car did something crazy.
That it did it. That's a tricky spot to be in. I don't think
Yeah.
I'd want to buy a car if I was worried about having to prove that something
I think
went
these are
sideways that way.
existing owners, I think.
A report comes in and then someone says, we saw it with Toyota, right? My car won't stop. It's accelerating on its own. And then there's a claim versus well, some of it's going to be user error. Some of it was a set issue. But that's the reason
Aftermarket
people
floor
get dash
mats, not
cams
a
in the
great
first
thing.
place.
Yeah.
Right. But that, they get it to prove that they didn't do wrong. Having to add one to the footwell is a unique spot to be in.
Though it's worth noting that I have been unable to find any video of a unintended acceleration complaint where some sort of footwell camera has proved that it was the car's fault. So that does lead back to the concern of human behavior being the issue.
Right.
But
Right.
it is also worth noting that this seems to kind of dovetail with what the government there is interested in doing.
I do have one more thought. And if the larger concern, I think there's kind of two pieces here, right? We've talked about unintended acceleration on one side, but it's also just the inability to slow down fast enough, the response to slowing down. At what point, again, if we're looking at safety, do we say this vehicle is too large and doesn't slow down or brake fast enough, even if you're doing everything right? Because cars are not getting lighter, and while some of them are stopping shorter, it's not all of them.
And here, that's where some of this data does get a tiny bit tricky. So it does appear that at-fault accidents are more likely in a Model Y than an X3. And I think that's as close of a pairing as we can really get. And it's worth noting that in this instance, weight is not a concern because Y is actually lighter than the average Model 3. So for detractors that are like EVs are too heavy and they're intrinsically heavy and this is why they're bad, Tesla, to their credit, has proved that it does not need to be heavier than a gas vehicle. They have made comparable vehicles, depending on exactly how you feel about range. Yes, your X3 will go 200 miles more than your Model Y, but it's not going to be as fast. So I'd call that an okay trade-off. So, take that for what you will, guys. But you can have more power, better performance, very similar handling or better handling, less ground clearance, admittedly, in a Model Y. But largely a very similar kind of experience, same category, and actually less curb weight. So, it is definitely possible to do these things. Yeah, I am curious to see why we don't have the IHS or the Euro NCAP or other European researchers digging into this more, because I really want to see a behavioral study agnostically on this. People that are, especially if you could do drivers learning to drive, people that haven't driven before, because then you don't have habits. Obviously in this pairing, I would be much more likely in a one pedal drive car to move my foot over than some people would. So like these habits and habit forming, so I just want more research on this. Let's stick some cameras and some footwells, see what people do. How else are we going to know, right?
There you go. Why not?
Yeah, so if you guys want to volunteer, people should reach out to the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety and volunteer your footwell. They're probably going to ask why they're going to have volunteers, but hey, you never know. Could be a thing.
And if they don't pay you, you could maybe sell it to Feet Finder.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Wow, we went there. Okay. And with that, let's go on to the NACS Finder, because we have some news here. We have been able to charge Fords and GM vehicles with the Tesla charge adapter and at a brand new V4 station. I have to admit, though, it was smoother on one than on the other.
Okay. Are we taking bets, or do we get the
Sure, yeah, let's take a bet.
With the like adapter per model.
Yep.
Well, Ford's has been out longer, but Chevy's has had longer to cook if they were going to roll out and wanted to do things smoothly. I want to. It's not about one. I think it'll be Chevy. I think
Oh,
that'll be
no,
the
it's
surprise one.
rather sadly it's Ford. Well,
Okay.
or good for Ford, not sadly necessarily, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
But no, I was kind of
The only
surprised. So
winners and losers are the other brand.
you just roll up to your supercharger station in your Lightning. This was a V4
Mhm.
station, so the cable was longer, sufficiently longer.
Wonderful.
I was a tiny bit concerned that it wasn't long enough. Actually, not
Okay.
a problem at all. So
Perfect.
concern just crossed off the list.
Yep.
You
Good
just
news.
walk up, you just grab your handle, stick it on the thing, and plug it into the car, and then it charges. It actually was really swift. It does plug and charge, so there's
Great.
no cards, no apps to use. You just plug it in. So fantastic on that front, and it did handshake faster than the average CCS station. So not
Okay.
quite as fast as the last Tesla we supercharged, but so close it doesn't really make any difference.
Right.
Um,
Quick is quick.
one quick is quick. One thing I will say though is that you're still going to be bugging other Teslas out there because it does not speed up your charging in your Lightning. Um,
Hmm.
the Lightning has a big enough battery that the cable starts to overheat. And remember that Tesla's charging profile is only high current for a limited window. So
Right.
basically, it hits that window, doesn't hit 250 kilowatts like a Tesla will, just because the voltage of the battery, but
Mhm.
hits good for the Lightning, 200 something, and then starts leveling off after about 15 minutes or so to a rate lower than if you were at an EA station. So it's not going to be faster than going to the EA station, but it's going to be pretty convenient.
Okay. Especially if you're not taking that giant road trip where you don't need to fully charge, you're topping off
Hmm.
or just a little bit to get to your next stop, and there's charging there.
Hmm.
Not the end of the world, but good to know.
Or if you are taking a road trip, because there are certainly still charging deserts in the US that are served by Tesla and not the other
Hmm.
charging networks. So it does open a lot of possibilities. I will
Hmm.
say it is interesting, um, given Ford's real hard push on this, that the software does not take you to any Tesla supercharging stations.
Hmm.
It
Not
knows
yet,
they're
at least.
there, and it knows they exist, etc., and you can navigate to them and all that. But
Hmm.
if you're literally in the parking lot of a supercharger station
Hmm.
and your battery is at 5% and you enter a destination 300 miles away, the software says go a mile down the road to EA and fill up there.
Got it. So
Like the
we
call
haven't
is
fully
coming from
integrated
inside the
yet.
house. Yeah,
Yeah.
not quite yet. Um, On the GM side, GM software just as bad on that front.
Okay.
So does not tell you to charge at the supercharger station. Interestingly, in the Blazer, though, I think the performance was actually pretty good because the charge curve and charge timing was exactly the same as at an EA station, and that actually I think
Okay.
is because of the high current capacity of the Tesla superchargers. So no difference in the charge profile. The car hit its 155 kilowatt peak, slightly over the specification, hung out there
Hmm.
just as long as normal. The experience was not as good though. We did notice some charger interoperability issues. I had to visit 3 stations. Initially, I was like, "What's going on? Is it weird? Did my authorization for being allowed to charge here not work?"
Hmm.
Charging via the Chevy app is a hot mess. Chevy
Okay.
says you're supposed to initiate the charge in the Chevy app. No, don't
Okay.
try that. Just use the Tesla app. Just use the
At
Tesla
least,
app to
at
start
least
it.
at the moment, right?
Yeah.
Is it the same speed or a little slower than a CCS handshake?
Basically the same speed as a CCS on GM side.
Okay.
Details, who knows why.
Right.
And this was again, for everybody that out there that's wondering, it's a V4 station, so just the latest in Tesla's station. However, we don't have access to a vehicle to test if this station, which is one of the newest V4 stations, we don't have a vehicle to test to see if it does support 1,000-volt charging.
Hmm.
Apparently, almost all the V4 stations out there are actually V3 on the back end. So they have the new
Right.
pedestals on the
That's
front, but not the new back. I'm curious to see if this is any different because the labels on the stations all say 1,000 volts. Who knows?
Okay.
Who knows what's there? And that is
Yeah.
important for our next topic, which may not be able to talk about. So we'll just, if we hop onto something else, that's why, guys. This will be in a future episode. Now, speaking of things we notice, what have you
hmm
noticed on new cars that you just want to burn with fire? What drives you up the wall when you see it on a new car that makes you think, yeah, that was dumb?
Big wheels.
Big wheels.
We
Okay.
are getting such
How
big
big?
wheels. Well, it's a good question, and I I wish I remembered off the top of my head. There was a vehicle I was looking at. It might have been you and me just a couple weeks ago, and I think it had 20 or 22-inch wheels, and they looked like 18s. I mean, just the scale of things is increasing so drastically, and it looked like, oh yeah, that's the standard wheel. But standard in my head is
Mhm.
still an 18, maybe a 19 for a larger vehicle. And it was like a 22-inch wheel. And that seemed like the standard. And now 22s and 24s are so much more common. And, back in the day, let's say mid 2000s, 22 was rolling on dubs. And that was like, oh my God, can you believe it? And now it's like, yeah, you can almost order that for your minivan from the factory. So, I would like to see us move away from enormous wheels. You just don't get a whole lot of tire left either. And if you want a more comfortable ride, more tire never hurts. It's also less expensive replacing those tires.
That's
So I'm
true.
going to start
Yeah.
out with really, really big wheels on a really consistent basis.
I'm going to start with piano black needs to just die. I don't know what
Mm,
engineers were thinking or designers when they got into an interior and they said, you know what, this interior needs a shiny black hole that's going to be a
hmm
scratchy black hole in 5 seconds flat. I have never seen a car that looked good with piano black. Never.
mm.
I actually don't even think pianos look good in piano black, especially if you're at a piano bar where people are crawling all over the piano like that thing's going
Yeah.
to get scratched up. That's a bad idea. I have no idea why that ever became a thing. And the
Mm.
only thing I can assume is uh, they thought it was a hint of luxury because there was a period where you could get highly lacquered wood that was almost black
Yep.
in some ultra high end luxury vehicles, and they were like, "Yes, let's have a piece of that."
That's the
Only,
moment.
only we'll use a black Lego, and we're just gonna spread that black Lego all across the dashboard.
Yep.
I don't get it at all. No more black plastic.
I mean, there are so many other ways you can do it, and so many other materials you can use, and so many other finishes. It does seem like that's the standard right now is piano black, and it looks really great in the studio for the first person who takes a look, and then after that, it starts to show wear. If you're curious about how your car is going to hold up, check it out at an auto show
Yep.
and see what that interior looks like on day 2 or 3.
How do you feel about headlight controls not having a knob? This is apparently a hot button issue for some. I don't get it.
Mm.
I don't. I use the auto headlights. I don't care where the knob is.
Instead of a knob, do you mean like a button instead of a knob, or it's in a touch screen, or
Entirely in
what's?
software, like in the touch screen, like Teslas and like the latest GMs, etc. They're like, yeah, we don't need a knob
Yeah.
anymore. Stick it in the touch screen. I don't care.
The last time that was an issue was I was going to a drive-in movie and I had to turn off my headlights, but you had to obviously leave the vehicle on. You're listening to it through the radio,
Okay,
and
boomer.
I had to figure out how to turn off the headlights, and it took me a second. That was the last time I ever cared about it because I think everyone should be, is just using auto headlights.
So
Um,
for the people that are under 60 years old out there, drive-ins used to be this thing where the theater screen was outside and you were outside in your car watching the theater.
oh, it's the
Um,
hip new thing to go to the drive-in like your grandparents used to.
at any rate, it just doesn't bother me somehow.
No, no, it's good to know where they're at, but you
Yeah,
don't need access to them
what bothers
easily.
me more is the headlights that are weirdly located in the front. Why are the
Okay,
headlights why are they not with the other lights? Let's just stick all the lights in one spot like we used to.
the divorce
I
headlight.
The divorced headlight thing, I don't get it.
Mhm.
Mom and dad split up for the kids, I guess. But I don't know. I don't know.
I think it really depends on the implementation, but I've seen more that I dislike than that I like. Yeah,
I would agree. Generally
it's
speaking,
one of those
bad.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Also, off-road trims that don't add much off-road capability. I don't understand this. I
Mm.
mean, it gives you a taste of the divine. Everybody wants to be Jeep all of a sudden, but
Mhm.
does it actually like why? Why who's actually out there taking their Honda Pilot or their Honda Passport actually is a better example because the current Passport has the Trail Sport trim, but
Yes.
it's the lowest bar in the off-road world. We have relatively low profile tires still, a super
Mhm.
firm suspension. We have an all-wheel drive system that's pretty capable, and Honda really wanted
Right.
us to off-road in that puppy. And I spent way too many hours on way too many rough roads getting my kidneys punched in the Passport Trail Sport so they could prove
Yeah.
that their all-wheel drive system worked. I'm like, guys, I
Worked.
know it works, but
Yep.
this is not
Confirmed.
made for this trail.
Right. And you don't need a trail sport to drive the trail. You could take one of the other
Yeah,
trims and 90% of the time be just fine. And if you really wanted to, you could swap some different, wheels and tires on there for different seasons, perhaps. Um, it sells, and that's the
it
answer,
does.
right? If we
Yeah.
have a Tremor trim, an FX4 package, the XRTs, right? We've got an
Mhm.
off-road package, Ionic 5. It sells, and it's
The
one of those
XR
things where
the
we
dumbest
can look at it,
package.
we can look at it and say we hate this, but we, the collective, are part of the problem because they wouldn't build it if we weren't going to buy it. In most
Uh,
cases.
and this goes with calling non-skid plates, calling them skid plates. Every time I'm at a
Mm.
Hyundai or Kia thing and they're like, "It's got skid plates on the front." And I'm like, "It does?" And they're like, "Yeah, yeah,
So what
right
would
there."
you do
Like, "No,
with that
no.
plate?
That is a piece of plastic trim.
Hmm.
This is not a skid plate. They are
Hmm.
different. You can
It's a
call it
fairing.
whatever you want. It doesn't make it so." This is like,
Yeah, underbody fairing.
yeah, they're not even under the body. They're on the bumper, and they're like, "Yeah, it's one of those thingies." And eh, no,
I'll,
that's
I'll
not it.
I'll tell you the last thing that with new cars that really does drive me crazy: grayscale. I want to see more color, and there are
Hmm,
so many cars that come in black, white, silver, gray, and maybe a blue. And
the
a lot
sea
of the
of
times
black.
it's a really toned down blue.
Yes.
Uh, I want to see more color. Bring back some oranges and some greens and some purples. And the people, again, are the problem. We need to buy them.
Now, do you want some
I'm
oranges and greens and purples inside or just outside?
I wouldn't mind it either. It's fun to have a splash of your outside color in. You can do that with the MX-5. You
Mhm,
can get
mhm.
a red on the outside, and it gives you some red on the inside. It's a fun way to do it. But I would rather see more colors on the exterior than I do on the interior because overall there are some pretty unique and good looking interior color combinations these days.
Mhm.
There's just not a lot for the outside. It's all grayscale, and I want to just see a little more splash of color.
Hmm. I have had it with trim that's hard to clean, inside or outside the
Mm,
car. Honda has gotten really bad with this on the inside, and the luxury car companies, pretty much all of them, have gotten really bad on the outside. So, like with Hondas, it's the acres of cheese grater on the dashboard, and you can't get in there to
the
clean behind
detailer's
it,
nightmare.
but you can see the dust in there. And
Hmm.
on practically every luxury car company, actually, the cheaper the luxury car, the better on this front, or the worse, depending on how you you want to phrase this.
Hmm.
They have the fake air ducts and the fake this and the fake that and louvers here and there wherever, and you just can't clean that easily if you're the kind of person that wants to wash a car yourself.
Right.
Shapes that are easier to clean. I just don't understand how that got so hard. Like how small are people's fingers that they can get into these crevices to clean, or is it a conspiracy? Then they want you to take it to the car wash
Absolutely. It's
with
it's
the
big
whatever.
car wash. It's big
Big
detail
car wash, big
working its way.
detail. Yeah. And that's our conspiracy of the day here at the Auto Buyer's Guide podcast, brought to you
Hmm.
by Big Detailer.
Hmm.
And speaking of that, I guess we should end now. And then thank you all for tuning in, subscribing. If you haven't found the video, find the video, find the
Hmm.
podcast. If you haven't, we're on most of your favorite podcast platforms. or most of your unfavorites, depending on how you feel about some of them. So
Mhm.
find us here, find us there, find us everywhere, and we will see all of you next week.
Bye, everyone.
If you're looking for a new or used car to buy, maybe a truck or SUV or all-electric ride, we're the guys to help you decide. Here on the Auto Buyer's Guide. If discussions about donuts in the parking lot is what you came here looking for, well then my friend you're lost. Because our very human host Alex, we swear he's not a boss. Does he respect the cars a lot?